Remember Amnesia, The Dark Descent? I'm sure you do. It kickstarted the career of so many YouTubers out there. Refresh your memory or introduce it to people that haven't seen it because, God, has it really been that long? Every few years we get a new groundbreaking horror game, and Amnesia was one of them. It took concepts and mechanics from Frictional Games' earlier titles, the Penumbra series, and put it on full blast. It was a horrifying, terrific game that took the world by storm, and it gave birth to the Let's Play scene on YouTube. Fast forward 3 years, Frictional Game brings on board the Chinese Room, a British game company previously known for their hit game Dear Esther. Their biggest and only successful game at that point was a story-heavy game with dark and grim twists, just the kind of thing to fit Amnesia. They ordered to develop the Amnesia spin-off, which resulted in The Machine for Pigs. Critics loved the game, fans, not so much. People's core complaint about A Machine for Pigs is that it's a story-focused game, leading you to be less tense than The Dark Descent, which you can understand. In the end, Amnesia was a really tense and scary game, especially due to its monsters, right? 2015, Frictional Game releases a new game, Soma, a massive turn for the company's catalog. Focusing on psychological horror instead of monster chases, it had a thought-provoking and downright horrifying story, along with amazing and immersive visuals that really sold the premise. Despite good praise, however, it had one shared complaint from the audience. It's not scary as Amnesia was. I mean, this time it's not even an Amnesia title, so it's a bit of an irrelevant complaint, right? The monsters weren't as scary and the atmosphere wasn't as tense, the people say. 2020, Rebirth just drops out of nowhere. Seriously, this game got announced and dropped like 6 months later. It was a good game, definitely not their best title, and the story and gameplay had some issues, but it was still a great game that deepened the lore set on the Dark Descent and its origins. It was, again, bashed by fans. It wasn't like Amnesia, it wasn't tense like Amnesia, it was not scary like Amnesia. Seems like the fans have a point, that the devs just lost sight of what made Amnesia such a great game in the first place. Or did they? Bias is a fascinating thing. People have repeated throughout these 4 games the exact same complaints, that it just isn't as scary as Amnesia. Are they right? To answer that, we must first ask, what do people think when discussing Amnesia? Seems like only one factor, the tension, and 99% of the time they refer to the monsters. The AI was a big advancement in horror as it worked in interesting ways that indeed made the game more tense, but is that all there is to it? People show what they know about things and how they discuss it. It pictures the game as tense and scary, and the few that bother explain why, they always mention the monsters and sanity. Now, they are wrong, of course. Amnesia certainly was good because of those elements, but it isn't all there was to it. In fact, a lot of things people criticize these games for are things Amnesia itself did. I think it's finally time to remember Amnesia, what made it such a groundbreaking horror and how misremembered it is. The only thing worse than feeling alone is feeling like you are not alone. What really makes Amnesia have such an amazing atmosphere is that you never know what's around the corner. All the footsteps, shuffling around, groans and screams just feel so tense. As your sanity lowers, you hear voices, Daniel murmuring to himself, and bugs start to appear in your sight. You're always afraid of what might be lurking around the corner. It is horror-inducing visually, all the weird otherworldly artifacts, broken down locations, the flashy blobs of the shadow.
It really sells that you're being haunted by an eldritch horror. The enemies are constantly searching for you. At every corner you have to peek in case a grunt is around. Once the grunts are around, you have to be careful to not be killed as they are fast and much stronger. These are things Amnesia is so well known for: the tense atmosphere, the horrifying setting, and terrifying monsters. However, all that is artificial. Amnesia can only hold that atmosphere for so long, the setting wears off incredibly fast, and god, the monsters are awful. The so praised monsters are just a light bump in your quest. Every monster encounter is its own enclosed space, meaning you never have to go for too long, watching your every step, treading so carefully. Once you sneak past the grunt area, you won't ever deal with him again, unless you backtrack. But here's a little secret: if you let the monsters kill you, they will either despawn or move to the other side of the map. That's done so people can't get stuck trying to get past the same monster over and over again. But that creates a problem. If letting the monster kill you gets rid of the monster, then there is no danger. It's easier to just let them get you and respawn and have no problems going through that area than to deal with them at all by hiding and thinking over routes to avoid them. Instead, you just die and never have to worry about them again. Also, the AI is just awful. The pathfinding either will always find some crazy way to get you, or not be able to get to you because you either broke it or just feel silly at that moment. Sometimes it notices you when it shouldn't. It's honestly really hard to find footage of it in this because after discovering I don't have to deal with the enemies, I didn't put up a fight to have footage. The only interesting enemy with well-developed AI is the Karnk. You have to think about how to distract it and get around it without alerting it of the location. And if you do alert it, you have to quickly get off the water before it gets you. This creates really cool tension and action scenes. However, it's only used to this depth almost the entire game, and it's in the opening, which is also the demo for the game. So the best monster encounter was only done that way to catch attention in the demo. We encounter another Karnk far later in the game. You can completely avoid it by running across the body of water and never bother with it. And the next time you see it, it's at the bottom of a well and it's just a piece of a puzzle. The enemies are never used in any interesting ways, and their AI is far too primitive to work as expected. And since it despawns when you lose, there's no reason to even bother with them. So that's 1/3 of the tension gone. The atmosphere is not anything to write home about either. The previous games, the Penumbra series, had a far better atmosphere, especially since enemies pose a genuine threat in those games and you could never be too careful. Amnesia's atmosphere is primarily the sounds, which wears off incredibly fast. Once you hear enough voices and footsteps and learn that nothing's there, you lose that fear. You already expect nothing to be there, so it isn't as scary anymore. The sanity, which people heavily praise this game for, is very shallow. The idea is that the longer you spend in the dark or staring at things that terrorize Daniel, the more insane you'll become. However, it is incredibly artificial. It is cool to see how the scenery changes on how the player treats Daniel, but it isn't the groundbreaking horror technology people make it sound, especially the sort of view. After a while, it becomes incredibly annoying, especially considering that you meet the dark often if you're trying to save up oil, and you keep hearing just that annoying fucking sound every time. I thought Rebirth just came up with that, but in the end, I had never spent that long in the dark in Amnesia. It's actually quite a challenge to stay in the dark for that long. You have to be purposely avoiding light, like me avoiding using a lantern. When in a dark area, the game will light up your surroundings, and you never have to traverse dark areas that are too long, so you never use too much oil. Getting to the lowest level of sanity is harder than staying on the highest, meaning that this whole mechanic can completely be avoided by just normally playing the game.
There's even hallucination enemies, and even at my most insane, I didn't even see one. I know that if you do reach the lowest insanity, you die in hard mode, but this is a mode specifically tailored for the people who want a harder challenge, and it was done 8 years after the game's release. So in the end, it's just extra for the people who already finished the game. All the sanity stuff is all set dressing for the real gameplay, finding notes.
Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for! That's what it's all about! Woo!
A massive problem with Amnesia, and lots of horrors after it, is that the story is told through notes. Doesn't sound so bad, does it? The story all has happened already, and you're just witnessing the aftermath through notes that detail the story. The problem is that you never need to find any notes in Amnesia, besides the opening one. You can play the entire game without ever knowing what the main story even is. Daniel's motivations and what led him to take the Amnesia potion can be completely missed. That means that the main story of the game is completely optional. They wrote such an interesting story on literal paper. Of course, they are in obvious locations, so you're never left out of the loop. But if someone doesn't care to pick it up, you just miss the story, buddy. The game tries to circumvent this, of course. You start the game knowing your own voice, your name is Daniel, and you have the goal of killing a man named Alexander. As you go through the castle, the game comes to a halt to give you flashbacks of events and interactions Daniel had. Through this you can get the basis of what Alexander has done to deserve death, what Daniel has done to want redemption, and what some of what has happened in the castle. You won't ever know the details, but it's something to drive the player forward. But in the end, what is the story that Amnesia is trying to tell?
Well, we start off, having amnesia. Daniel brews an amnesia potion and drinks it to forget the awful things he has done in this castle. During an expedition to Algeria, Daniel finds a glowing orb that shatters into pieces. Eventually, the orb starts killing off everyone that Daniel interacts with, trying to get him for having the orb. Then Daniel receives a letter telling him to come to Castle Brandenburg. The host, Alexander, is an immortal being from another world that has been banished to our reality. He's lived through many centuries and made a name for himself. He too was haunted by the shadow of the orb, as he calls it. He wants to help Daniel get rid of his shadow too by performing a ritual. For a long while, he kidnaps random people and teaches Daniel to torture them and murder to keep the shadow away, and he obeys because he's desperate to save his own life. Plus, he said they're criminals, so it would be morally good to sacrifice these evil people to save a good person's life. However, during a ritual, he came to realize that the people he's been killing for Alexander are actually innocent people he kidnapped, and he stained his hands and can't forgive himself, driving him to take the amnesia potion to forget his actions so he can have the strength to kill Alexander, as he stole Daniel's orb to open a portal to his original world. It was all a trick, you see. There's Agrippa in there as well, in this part of the story. In the end, the story is rubbish in the same way the story of Dark Souls is so unexciting. God, I can't wait to justify this. The thing is, you aren't experiencing a story, you are reading the aftermath of one. Daniel has already gone through his journey of redemption, as he has realized his actions and chosen to right his wrongs. All you're doing is watching a recap.
Alexander, I will kill you for what you have done. If only the shadow had caught me in London
yeah,
or
this is so
Algeria,
exciting.
I wouldn't have to suffer this
I'm so
humiliation.
excited. This is a writing style I just can't get behind. That you are only seeing the aftermath and sometimes concluding the story. In this one, you conclude by facing Alexander. But that means nothing exciting happens throughout the game. You're just going through note by note, piecing together what has happened here, all while nothing changes, besides the shadow getting more violent by the end and Agrippa just being there. This story never has turns, or moments that make you excited. The number had a similar idea of exploring the aftermath of past events, but in its case, it's far better due to the fact that you aren't exploring the aftermath of your own actions. You're exploring your father's abandoned projects, so as you explore that story, there's the B story of your own journey trying to discover all this. With how Amnesia is written, there's no B story. You're just at the final portion of it, and recapping what has happened previously, making there not be any real stakes as everything has already happened. The concept of a story that has already happened can be done well. Take Layers of Fears for example. You're recapping the events of a broken family, but what exactly happened between the family members is up to the player and their interpretation. You don't have to collect the notes to understand the core plot, but it explains the finer details, displaying the characters rather than the game recapping it through dialogues and visuals. You're in the aftermath, but the aftermath as a whole is its own journey, opposed to only being the end of it. Not to mention people's complaint about their more recent games is the fact that they are so story focused. Amnesia literally stops you every step of the way to give you flashbacks to tell a story. Agrippa won't shut the fuck up to give you exposition. It having cutscenes and characters and interesting dialogue about human existence is boring and not tense. God, I can't wait to walk through a dark hallway and listen to some flashback dialogue throughout the entire game as the only form of storytelling because that's the smartest way they came up to tell the story. In the end, Amnesia is not the all-inspiring game people make it sound. It comes from a time when the horror market was falling off, with Silent Hill no longer being the amazing series it once was, and horror games becoming more of a gimmick than a genuine genre. Amnesia's real achievement was redefining what horror games could be. It reminded us of a time when horror games told bone-chilling stories with interesting gameplay. It revived the horror genre to its former self, When games had idea and genuine story and not just cheap scares and spooky monsters. When the real horror is what is inside of us and not what we see. This is why Amnesia is so praised to this day and so misremembered. People from back in the day playing it saw what horror games could be and was settled as the scares of its time, even if it wasn't actually. Their newer games have been far better. Rebirth takes place in the middle of a story as you discover what took place and see events transpire and plot twists happen. Soma is just one of the best stories ever written, with plot twists and concepts beyond what any other game has done. Bunker's survival horror with a bigger focus on gameplay, but still has a good story with developing characters and twists. Their gameplay is much more in line with their stories, as now they tell their story through the game itself and not the notes. When discussing this with my friend, they had even asked me if Soma even had notes, because when he played it, he couldn't recall a single note in the game. The game does have notes, but it's only background to the story you're currently experiencing. Say for Rebirth, it details the background of the characters you see throughout the game, but the story itself is told as you play the game. It is the player's journey that they are developing as they play, not the recap of a previously developed story. After Amnesia, we only had booms like so with Five Nights at Freddy's, PT, and Babysitter Bloodbath, games that genuinely redefined the horror genre and what could be done. All of them weren't the greatest, but showed what horror games could do. Even fictional games could recreate what they had done. Soma, one of the best games ever, they inspired the creativity and innovation Amnesia had. Despite it having such an original story and resolution, we're back into that dark abyss, with horror genre being drier than ever. We're all just waiting for another game like Amnesia to take the world by storm and redefining what horror games could be, instead of just being a flashy gimmick.